Hello listeners, Jordan here. I just want to let you know that you can listen to Nighttime early and ad-free on Amazon Music. Include it with Prime. Before we begin this episode, I'm happy to share a positive update concerning Shelley Fillipoff's legal situation. As we heard in episode 2 of this series, Shelley had been facing a series of charges related to cocaine and firearms offenses. But fortunately, that's all behind her now. On Wednesday, the 23rd of November 2016, all charges against Shelley Fillipoff had been withdrawn. Despite many nasty online commentators disagreeing with me, I never believed these charges or any alleged criminal activity by a Fillipoff family member had any connection to Emma's disappearance. And I'm just happy that this is all behind Shelley and she's able to continue to focus on her search for Emma. If anyone is interested in more info on this legal update, I've added some relevant links in the episode notes. But I have nothing else to say on the matter, so let's get to the episode.
According to the police officer I spoke to, they went through a list of questions in order to ascertain whether or not she was safe and determined that she was okay to be on her own on the streets of Victoria barefoot in November, and they left her there. That was the last time anyone ever saw her.
You are listening to Emma Fillipoff is Missing, a series by the Nighttime Podcast.
When I look back at the first 3 episodes in this series, I feel Emma Fillipoff's story is slowly being revealed, but what I see floating to the surface is a bit different than I'd expected. Throughout this series, we primarily focused on the details of her disappearance and her activity in the days and weeks that immediately preceded it. Of course, this period of time is incredibly important and certainly critical if one hopes to find Emma or learn her fate. But there's a big problem. Emma's activities in this time leading up to her disappearance seem as airy and as open to interpretation as the poetic wordplay she filled her journals with. My opinion is that the most direct route to understanding Emma's story is by understanding the 26-year-old woman who stood shoeless and disoriented on a busy intersection in Victoria on November 28, 2012. Although in the past we did discuss her personality in a basic sense, I feel I'm still a long ways from understanding Emma. And as this series takes its next steps, I hope to change that. In the next 4 episodes of this series, we'll be joined by 4 people who were very close to Emma during different points in her life. As they share their memories of Emma, I believe an accurate portrait will emerge. But with it, her slowly degrading mental health will become painfully obvious. I'll be releasing these episodes in a sort of chronological order, starting with her childhood best friend and leading up to a young man she befriended while living in a state of near homelessness in Victoria just prior to her disappearance. So let's get to it. Tonight, in this episode of Nighttime's Emma Fillipoff is Missing series, our guest is Emma's childhood best friend, Ellen.
I'm Ellen, and I'm a close long-term friend of Emma's. We grew up together in the same small town.
Do you recall even roughly when you first met her?
Yeah, so the way that things work in our town is that there's a number of really small schools all outside of the main town of Perth. And when students hit grade 5, they start getting bused into town for the students. So when we were in grade 5, Emma transferred from the smaller, sort of more rural school she was at into the public school in Perth. So we would have been in grade 5, which is, I don't know, maybe 12 years old.
Can you describe getting to know her and maybe telling me what led you to become so close?
Yeah, so actually when Emma came to the school, we hated each other. We're very, very different people. So she was at that sort of life stage. She was very feminine. And I was the complete opposite. I was really, really into playing soccer, baseball, and really any sport that I could play. But like, if you can imagine, essentially, I was like the kid with scraped up knees and would come home kind of like with dirt in my hair from like whatever I got up to at recess. And she was like quite pristine, well dressed, and really kind of put together. Yeah. So it's quite opposites at the time.
Yeah. What do you think it was that led you to get along so great and eventually become such close friends?
I don't know why it happened, but we were in the same class together, and our teacher sent us both across the hall to work in this little room, like about 5 feet by 5 feet. It was like a room used for the canteen, so for selling sort of snacks at lunch. But we ended up having to go over there for a little bit every day to do some work. And at some point, we started singing in that room. And we just got hooked on the way our voices sounded in that room. Neither of us were singers. Neither of us sang in public or had any interest in doing that. But we started going over into the singing room every day, which is what we called it, and requesting to get sent over there. So, convincing our teacher that actually the best work was done when the two of us could go over into that room and sing.
I guess this would have been at the end of elementary or junior high school at this point?
Yeah, so our schools went like kindergarten to grade 8 and then straight into high school.
During this part of Emma's life, like during high school, can you describe her personality and maybe like the kind of things you would do together when you were spending time?
Yeah, I spent some time today reflecting on and thinking about our friendship at that time. And I think the best way I can describe it is that our friendship brought out our silliest selves. Differing from other relationships we had and who we were expected to be as students, when we got together, we were ridiculous and silly and sort of took any excuse to play or to dress up or to sing. We at some point started this narrative that actually we were twins, separated at birth, and our parents were, I really don't know where this came from, but our parents were actually Ethan Hawke and Uma Thurman, who were like fairly big movie stars at the time. And this was like the big secret that no one knew. So we would make up these stories and these worlds and these games. I think that really captures who she was then. Quite silly. But there also was the other side to her, which is that she's always been a very artistic person, both through like photography and drawing and writing poetry. And that was always kind of the quieter, private side of her. And that was kind of her alone time.
You said it was more in her private, quiet time. Was she like that? Like, was she the type that was often talking about, her poetry and sharing her artwork or whatnot? Or was this something that she just kind of went off on her own and did?
I would sometimes get to read her writing because we were in class together. Mm-hmm. And so, at that time she would have to write pieces for English class, or we had to write poetry for English class. And so then I would be like maybe a little more privy to it. But I think it was mostly something that she did on her own for herself.
So Emma lived with you for a period of time, I understand. I think during high school. Can you describe that and maybe tell me what led to it?
Sure. I think that actually all through elementary school and into high school, we both spent a lot of time at each other's houses. So our house was kind of always that spot with an open door. And then what happened when we were about 16, which we thought we were more like 21, we were sure we had everything figured out, and only really in hindsight can I recognize that actually we were still kids at that time. Emma really didn't want to have anything to do with curfews or rules around where she could be and when she could be there. And so she decided that she was going to move out of her parents' house. She told them that she really didn't want a curfew and they really wanted her to have that safety around her of things like a curfew. So she decided she was moving out, and the natural place for her to go was to come to my house. And so even though I'm sure her parents were scared about her deciding to move out, it actually was probably the safest place and a comfort for them to know that she was with us, which meant that Shelley could call up my mom and ask, how things were going, or she could call up and talk to Emma. But it also meant that she now was just under someone else's rules. Very similarly, my mom wanted to keep her safe, and so enforced a curfew. And so it wasn't too long until she decided to get her own apartment in town.
The average 16-year-old would have issues with curfew and rules and whatnot, but it would be unusual to actually leave the house. At the time, did you remember her like any specific reason she had such a difficult time dealing with the curfew? Or was she just, I'm just thinking, like, was she someone who was very rebellious, or was there some other reason she had such a hard time dealing with it?
It's a little hard to pull it apart now because so much time has passed, but honestly, I think it was pretty regular teenage stuff, which is that she felt really strongly about being able to have her independence. She felt really strongly about being able to stay out all night if she chose to. So I think this was fairly typical, and you're right. It's a bit atypical to actually follow through. But also the follow through was to this safety net you already had, right? Follow through was to this house that you had spent a lot of time. She had, really strong relationships with my parents and with my sister as well. And so it wasn't too much of a jump.
Yeah, it was already kind of set up, so it wasn't that big of a deal for her to go with it. Like, I guess it would have been a big deal if it was anyone other than your family.
Yeah, so I would say the bigger jump was to actually go and get an apartment. That was, none of our other friends at 16 had an apartment. When I think back at it, I think that after she got her own apartment, she missed some of the aspects of a family home. Like the Fillipoff's family home was warm and lively and full. So there's 4 kids, and they always had friends there. Like, I remember thinking, that's the type of home that I see on TV.
So speaking of that point, can you describe Emma's relationship with her family, and as well as how she described her relationship with her family to you?
Emma's relationship with her family was that she had a different relationship with each individual member of the family. So she connected on different things. She had different jokes. They also came together as a unit, but it was always neat to watch those relationships. And they, since I have known her since we were so young, then those relationships have changed as well. As her younger brothers got older and they, switched from being sort of that sibling to developing friendships. I think that Shelley has spoken about him as well, but in particular, Emma's relationship with her youngest brother was quite maternal. She was quite a bit older, and so she had a maternal bond with him, that she really wanted to care for him. And he had, when he would have the place that he practiced karate would have bring your parent to karate night, and he would bring Emma and I, because we just, we loved doing those kind of things with him, and we would take him to every time a Harry Potter movie came out, we would take him to the theater and try to bring one of his friends as well. But just, they had a really strong connection. And I think with her dad, she shared a lot of her artistic side. So he's an artist, and I think she always really respected and looked to him to share that part of her. And her mom was very involved in our day-to-day life. So her mom was a teacher at the school that we went to together from grade 5 to grade 8, and she was our teacher and quite present, and someone who was really involved in the day-to-day.
Now, you would have been close with Emma during the time that her parents separated. Now, many people look to this as kind of a turning point in Emma's life. I'm just wondering if you can talk about how Emma reacted with her parents' separation, and maybe if you could share anything she would have told you about that, or how she spoke about it.
I think it was a big upset for her. I think that it was hard for her to know where she should be and what she should do, and just changed some of the things that had stayed sort of the same and stable throughout her life, like her parents living in their family home outside of town. I think that the change in itself was a big upset. I think it was scary and confusing for her.
Can you describe how her personality changed over the years, and maybe give some examples of times that you remember noticing this gradual change?
Right from when we were quite young, Emma was a private person. So she had a lot of people close to her, and the people that were close to her, she trusted. She kept journals when she was quite young, and that was always something that was quite private, like differing from her coming into my world and coming into my room, and sort of everything was fair game. That's something that I never would have done, is to go into her room and open her art book or open up one of her journals without her even having to say that. It was really quite clear that that was a line, and that she had elements of her life that was just for her. And then I now pull out these shifts when I look back, where I would say that need for privacy got bigger. She actually had less and less stuff as she got older. You hear a lot of people talking about these jeans that she wore, that she just, every time they would get a hole, she would patch them. And she loved her pants. They were part of her story, like something that was with her always. And I would say she started to keep few things, but keep them really close to her. So she would almost always have her backpack on, and in it she would really have her important things. And so to me, that time was a shift, when like a need for privacy, which I think we all have and have private things, sort of started to tip over into what feels more like secrecy. And she sort of tightened her circle around her. So in her adult years, if she told me what she was going to do the next day, she would often remind me too many times to not tell anyone. For example, she would say like, "Oh, tomorrow I'm going to go to the quarry with my dad, but don't tell anyone, okay?" To the point that it felt funny. Honestly, it felt frustrating to me. I would sort of quip back, like, who am I going to tell and who cares? But she really needed to say it. And I would say those were like the first signs of it being more than just regular need for privacy.
Mm-hmm. And was it specific to being private about where she was going to be and what she was thinking? Or was it all aspects of her life she just wanted to, I guess, keep to herself and her close circle?
All, definitely most aspects of her life. I remember we went to the movies one day. It probably was with her youngest brother, but we went to the movies and we were going into the movie, and then she got it in her head that she had left her car unlocked. And I didn't want to go back to the car, but she was insistent on it. So we had to go back to the car and double check that it was locked. And it felt like she was really worried about her things in the car. Not because they had financial value, but because they were hers and they were private. So I'd say a lot around sort of the security of the things she needed to live her life, which was, her couple articles of clothing and, some toiletries and maybe a passport. I actually don't know exactly what she kept in her bag. Sometimes she kept a stuffed animal she had since she was a baby, which I know made it all the way to Victoria. She still had this terribly ugly, stinky, hugged until it's got no fluff left in it, stuffed animal. So these were the things that she kept really close and kept in her backpack and really were, nothing that as a friend I wouldn't just like go into her backpack to find something that would feel like I'm sort of, walking into a locked room, really invading on her space. Not that she would have to tell me that, it just felt that way.
Interesting. Now, getting to Julian, some people will talk about his relationship with Emma maybe leading to her suffering from such extreme paranoia, but it sounds to me she was showing some traits of being paranoid before being involved with Julian or meeting Julian. Is that accurate to say?
I think so. I think that it was definitely something that was coming out more and more, is these feelings of the need for privacy, which now in hindsight feel a lot more like paranoia to me. And I don't really know what part Julian played in it because I really wasn't there. I do know that people were mesmerized by her. They were really drawn into her, and I hear that from what I've heard him say. Is she really did have that charm that sort of drew people to want to be around her in any capacity.
Now, what do you remember about her move to British Columbia? Do you recall this time and why she did go there?
She originally moved out west to go to school on Vancouver Island. And actually my older sister, who was also very close with Emma, drove out west with her. And I was at university in Waterloo. And so they drove from Perth to Waterloo and then stopped over for a few days. And it was quite a funny time. It was right before Emma's birthday. And she's never really been big on birthdays. And so they were on this mission to avoid her birthday altogether. And so they were kind of hiding out in Waterloo, and we were, doing a lot of cooking together and hanging out. And there was this undecided date that they were going to continue on their way. And the other quite funny thing about the trip is that actually Emma had to do a calculus course before she was eligible for the school that she was enrolled in, which was like a cooking school to become a chef. And so on this journey that they were taking, they also were studying, and my sister was helping her through her calculus program. And actually, I think a lot of that, I think Shelley was backing some of that. She was really interested in my sister helping Emma to get this calculus done. And so she was a big encouragement of this trip.
Now, when Emma was out west, be it in Vancouver at school or in Victoria, how did you stay in touch? Was it, telephone calls, chatting on the internet? What were your conversations like?
Sometimes she would call me, but we mostly connected through email. Her emails were often written in poem and were somewhat cryptic. So it was a little hard to know how how they connect it with actually what her life looked like there.
Can you give an example of the type of email you would have gotten from Emma?
Yeah, I was looking at them today and thinking about this, and one of them was about being at the School of Duel, she called it, and it was a school where people went to learn how to sword fight. But she just wrote me this long cryptic poem about Princess Bride, which is a movie we both really liked, and learning how to recreate the scene, because it's something we would throughout our life just recreate the scenes of that movie, and we sort of knew it word for word. And so she just sent me a poem all about that, and about going to one of the classes.
So she would, within these poems, she would actually describe, what her day-to-day was like, or describe an event in her life?
Yeah. Do you want to hear a bit of one?
I would love to.
Okay, so this one says, "Hey man, oh, I don't know. I'm on the island, on a great journey, learning, 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 writing, reading, painting, creating, seeing, dreaming. Every day is a surprise. Every day I find treasures and truths, and life is strange and life is beautiful. How are you? How's your brain? So long as one day we're able to sword fight again. Love you, dude. Miss you."
And when did she write you that?
That was very end of May in 2012. And, in hindsight now, I know she was staying at a shelter at that time. I don't know right at that time, but around that time anyways.
Through these emails that she sent you, did you see, or could you tell that her mental health seemed to be deteriorating?
No, it wasn't obvious in the emails. She did come home a couple of times since she moved out west that first time. And I would say that it was more obvious in her coming home, but really not to the extent that I know now. Mm-hmm. And it feels like she knew who would know and stayed quite far away. In
hindsight, is that what you think she was doing in Victoria, kind of just hiding out from everybody, kind of to keep what she was suffering from private?
I don't know if it's the only thing that she was doing out there, but I think that's part of it.
So the last message you had read to me from the email from Emma, I think you said was around May of 2012, leading up to November, ultimately when she disappeared from Victoria. Were her messages seemingly different in tone, or can you describe kind of the last messages she would have received from Emma leading up to her disappearance?
Yeah, that was my last email from her.
What you had just read to me was the last, and was that in May, did you say?
Yeah, very end of May.
Were people in touch with her leading up to November?
No, and really, it would. From home, it would likely be my sister or I. We sort of stayed really close with her, and so it would be us, and we hadn't heard anything. Mm-hmm. But I think mostly because she didn't reach out. I think a lot of things she kept inside of her.
Now, could you describe what you recall from initially after her disappearance? Like maybe tell me about first learning of Shelley's search for Emma.
So the morning that I found out, I was in grad school at the time, and I was only maybe a month and a half in, and it was a Saturday morning, I guess, and I was going into the lab. I had lab access hours, and I got a phone call from another really good friend of ours who grew up just down the road from Emma, and she said, "Emma's missing." And I was like, "What? I don't understand. Like, I'm just running out the door." I kind of I both didn't understand, and I feel like I didn't really know where to put what she was saying. So she told me to go to the computer and to Google Emma. And then all the news articles started coming up of her being missing. And then that's where it started to sort of feel real. But actually, I got my lab coat and I got picked up by a friend and I went into the lab because it felt like there was nothing else that I could do, and sort of went through my day a bit like a zombie, just sort of taking steps forward in order to try to sort out in my head what this could mean.
Would it have been in her personality to just disappear off the grid?
So Emma was both a very transient person in that she liked to go where she wanted to go when she wanted to go. It sounds just like when she was 16 and had a curfew. Mm-hmm. But it really, that was a consistent characteristic of her. It was partially a 16-year-old, but even as an adult, she really wanted to take opportunities as they came up and go and do it. And so for that first little while, I thought, like, a friend came along and offered her to go out on the boat for a week, and she took it. I'd play through all these ideas in my head because selfishly, as I got more and more worried for her, I also got worried that she would just show up the next week and that I'd be furious with her. And as much as she was a transient person and liked to be able to go where she wanted, when she wanted, she actually always has been grounded to some relationships. Like, she's never not told people. And so it's this, it's the two sides to everything, right? Is that, yes, she was transient, but also she cared really deeply in the relationships that she had and knew people cared about her and worried about her and would need to know these things.
During the time that Shelley was searching for Emma, were you involved in the search at all?
Yeah. So I was in this grad program at the same time. And so I was anchored to Kingston. And so both my sister and I did a lot of the online stuff. So Shelley knew she could call us to ask for anything. And so she would tell us what needed to get done. And then we would do sort of the back end of it. And then as soon as I had a break in school, which was in the winter, it was, a winter break, my sister and I flew out west and went and sort of did our own search on the island, based on sort of where Shelley had been and where she had heard things. And we sort of went and tracked down a couple of tips that had come in. And actually we went to every library and thrift shop that we could get to on the island and put up posters and talked to people and, met people who had sent in information and did it that way. But then when the week was done, I had to be back at school and my sister had to be back home as well. And so we came back and now I just still do whatever Shelley needs.
Some people believe that it's likely that Emma's living a transient life somewhere, just not wanting to be found. You've already commented on it a bit, but knowing her as well as you do, can you picture her being off on her own this long without reaching out to her family or her younger brother or yourself?
I can't imagine her, not sending an email, not calling. Both of our families have had actually the same landline phone number for as long as we've lived, right? These aren't like, they're not, they don't change. And so without reaching out, the other side to that is that I think that she was really unwell. And it's hard to know when your mental state is changed. Like, it's hard to know what you would know and what you wouldn't know. So I can't imagine sort of, not after 4 years, right? The like, whatever's fun in running off and going on an adventure, too much time has passed. I didn't think that's what she did in the first place, but I was always playing around with the different ideas in my head. Whenever I have dreams about Emma, it's that she's just gone on an adventure, and she comes back and she's, completely confused by everything that's happened. And I'm so, so furious in my dreams. In real life, I don't think that's possible.
In your home with your family, how often is it that Emma's brought up? I'm assuming you must constantly have it the story playing out in your mind. How often is this something you're talking about now, almost 4 years later?
A lot. I don't live in Perth anymore, but I would say every time I'm home, we talk about it. My mom thinks about it every day. My dad probably the same. My sisters and I, we talk about it, and when anything kind of comes up or changes, we'll let each other know about it. But there's not that much that's changed. I think we all think about her all the time.
What do you think most likely has become of Emma?
I don't know. And I think it's fair to say that anybody who knows her doesn't know. Because in my head, it's almost like I have a pro-con list for each of the options. And each of the options has as many things on the possibility side as not possible. So none of them stand out as the most likely. And you add in, what we believe is mental illness and a mental breakdown, and it just throws all the pieces up in the air again. And you add in this magnetism that she had, just the desire for people to get to know her better, and all the pieces get thrown up again.
This pro and con list you have of some of the different scenarios. Could you tell me a few kind of scenarios and things that in your mind that would make them impossible?
Yeah. So the first one being around, the transient lifestyle, and the things that are for it are, her desire for a journey, her desire to be in the moment, and go with that moment and what she's feeling. And the cons are just the relationships she has in her life, the relationships with her family, with her siblings, with my family, with her other friends as well. She has gone on adventures for a long time, and she always lets us know. The really big one on that side as well is that she kept her important possessions close to her, and she left those things in her van, things like her passport. This is something that she would keep on her even if she had no intention of leaving the country, because it's a security of knowing that you could.
In your
it's
mind,
a security of keeping those items really close. She carried this overly used stuffed animal with her, that she'd been carrying since I think she got it when she was about 5 years old, and she left that behind. These are her possessions. These are the things that are that are stand-ins for her people, and are also her ways out of situations. Money, passport, ID. These are the things you don't separate yourself from, and so that's definitely a big one. In terms of her committing suicide, is very, very hard to judge in terms of like just not knowing what her mental state was. On the other side, people who know her, I think everyone has kind of agreed it doesn't really fit with her. And there are just these back and forths for each one.
But ultimately now, going on 4 years since she was last seen, you're still scratching your head in the middle, not sure which is most likely.
Absolutely. I think it gets harder to believe that she left on her own will as years go on. It's also hard to think that there wouldn't be any change in her mental state, that she wouldn't know who she was, where she was. As time goes on, I worry about her being taken against her will. And I worry about her being, so mentally unwell that she wandered into a situation, even like into the, into the woods or something, and wasn't able to get herself out.
Is there anything else you want to share with people who haven't had the chance to meet Emma? Anything you could share with us to give us a better idea of the type of person she was and the type of personality she has?
So I listened to all your episodes today in kind of thinking about this. Mm-hmm. Honestly, like I listened to the one with Julian, and like he actually describes her quite well. As he's saying this, I'm kind of like nodding along, like kind of, laughed at one part or two, because it's, he describes her, and he describes even like her at her dad's house, like very accurately, better than I would be able to. The hardest thing to convey is that Emma is a whole lot of different things. I'm always trying to sort of paint the picture of who she is. And it's so hard. I say, oh, she was, quite transient, but also very grounded by her relationships. And I think that, she was silly and goofy and loving, and also private and secretive. And then we throw in, paranoid, right? And the words just don't quite do justice to describe and explain who she is. And so I hope by, you getting to talk to a couple of her friends that we're able to sort of put more pieces of the puzzle together. And I think that it's from getting those different perspectives that you start to kind of piece together both who she is, and also why it's so difficult to make any guesses on what happened.
If you're still with me, I want to thank you for joining Ellen and I for this revealing and intimate look at this formative part of Emma's life. Reflecting on the memories Ellen had shared, I'm left with a lot of feelings. But most of all, I just feel horrible that Ellen and the rest of Emma's loved ones are left without her and without an answer. But specific to Emma's personal story, what really stuck with me was hearing Ellen describe Emma's propensity towards secrecy, which Ellen described as bordering on paranoia. It's hard not to imagine that we're hearing about some of the early stages of whatever seemed to consume Emma's later life. Consider that as we move on through the upcoming episodes. The evolution of this secrecy, paranoia, and eccentric behavior seems to tell its own story. In the next episode, we're going to hear from another childhood friend of Emma's. However, this friend had a much closer look at Emma during her time in Victoria, BC. Our next guest, Michaela, was the young woman who Emma lived with upon her arrival to Victoria.
She wanted to be outside a lot, so she would go on these really long walks like 8 hours sometimes, all day, even sometimes at night for many hours. I was sort of curious about what she was doing on these really long walks. I remember she invited me once to come with her, and she showed me that she was walking down the streets of the suburbs in Victoria and taking all the leaves that had been piled by folks who'd raked up their lawns, that were taking all the leaves and spreading them everywhere. And she explained to me that for her, this was really important work that would help nature sort of regenerate, regrow. Yeah, I mean, that's how she was spending her time, and for her it was important that she do this.
And with that, we'll conclude this episode of the nighttime series, Emma Fillipoff is Missing. But before we wrap things up, I want to end with some thanks. First, and most significantly, I want to give a heartfelt thank you to Ellen. To simply refer to you as a friend of Emma's is a huge understatement. In speaking with you and speaking to others about Emma's relationship with you, you seem much more like a sister. I can't imagine how it must feel to have lost someone so dear to you, and I certainly can't imagine how it feels to speak about that loss. Ellen, I thank you for allowing me to provide a venue for you to share your memories. Next, a big thank you to Voxsomnia and Paragon Cause for providing the musical and ambient themes for this episode. And lastly, the biggest thanks of all goes out to everyone listening. Without you, the sun certainly would have rose on nighttime years ago. And for anyone out there who wants more nighttime, please consider supporting my Patreon campaign. For $1 a month, you can access the ad-free premium feed, which provides early releases of the episodes. And then, for just a couple dollars more, you can access the Nightcap After Show, in which I and a guest climb even further down the rabbit holes than you'll hear in the main episodes. You can join my Patreon and access the supporter content by visiting patreon.com/nighttimepodcast. And for anyone else who'd like to support the show, but can't pitch in financially, you can give me a big hand by telling your friends about me and leaving a positive review on Apple Podcasts or equivalent. If any of you listening want to stay up to date with my activities on or off the show, follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I use the handle @NighttimePod. If you have any story ideas or want to give feedback on the show, I'd love to hear from you at nighttimepodcast@gmail.com. Now until next time, take care of each other, hug your loved ones tight, and contact me on social media. Give me your theory on Emma Fillipoff's disappearance.
The Nighttime Podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Jordan Bonaparte. Copyright Jordan Bonaparte.
Somebody somewhere knows something. She didn't just disappear. She couldn't just vanish. Somebody has to know something, Jordan. Somebody has to know something.